What would you do if your child vanished without a trace in the time it takes to fold a load of laundry? But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. Picture this. It's an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in Maplewood, Washington. The sun is filtering through kitchen windows, birds are chirping in the backyard, and life feels perfectly normal. Lisa Thompson is doing something millions of parents do every single day: laundry. Her 8-year-old daughter Rebecca is playing outside, her auburn curls catching the sunlight as she arranges her dolls for an elaborate tea party by the swing set. It's the kind of peaceful domestic scene that happens in neighborhoods across America every day. But in just 15 minutes, Lisa's world would shatter into a million pieces. Has this ever happened to you? That moment when everything seems perfectly normal, only to discover that your reality has completely changed without warning? 1 minute, Rebecca was there, her sweet voice drifting through the open window as she chatted with her toys, creating elaborate stories and adventures. The next minute, when Lisa stepped outside to check on her daughter, she found only silence. Empty swings moving gently in the breeze, abandoned dolls scattered on the grass, and an open gate that Lisa was absolutely certain she had latched. Rebecca Thompson had vanished without a trace. What you're about to discover might surprise you, because this isn't just another missing child case that fades from the headlines after a few weeks. This is a story that would consume 3 years of desperate searching, sleepless nights, and a mother's unwavering determination to find answers. Lisa Thompson refused to give up, even when the police ran out of leads, even when the media moved on to other stories, even when well-meaning friends suggested it might be time to accept reality. For nearly 3 years, Lisa learned to navigate a silence so profound it felt like drowning. Every morning brought fresh waves of grief as she walked past Rebecca's bedroom, still decorated with unicorn posters and princess dolls, still waiting for a little girl who never came home. The kitchen table where Rebecca used to demand butterfly-shaped pancakes remained set for 2, even though only 1 chair was ever occupied. The swing set in the backyard stood motionless, a constant reminder of laughter that had been silenced. Stay with me until the end, because what happened next would challenge everything Lisa thought she knew about that terrible day in 1999. While Lisa was learning to exist in this crushing quiet, while she was fielding calls from psychics and following false leads across 3 states, while she was creating missing person flyers with Rebecca's smiling face and distributing them to every store, gas station, and community center within a 100-mile radius, something was happening that would change everything. Cleanup crews working in the flood-damaged Riverside Marsh were about to make a discovery that would bring Lisa the answers she desperately craved. But those answers would come with a price that no parent should ever have to pay. The phone call that would shatter 3 years of agonizing uncertainty was still hours away, but when it came, it would reveal a truth so horrifying that it would make the silence of those 3 years seem like a mercy by comparison. Because sometimes the answers we search for are more devastating than the questions that haunt us. The transformation from hope to heartbreak can happen in a single phone call. And for Lisa Thompson, that moment came at exactly 7:23 a.m. on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. She was standing in her kitchen, the same kitchen where Rebecca used to demand those butterfly pancakes, when the shrill ring of the telephone shattered the familiar silence. Detective James Williams had been the lead investigator on Rebecca's case since day 1. His voice had become a soundtrack to Lisa's nightmare over the past 3 years. Professional, compassionate, but always carrying disappointing news, false leads, dead ends, witnesses who thought they'd seen something but hadn't. But this morning, something was different. There was a careful quality to his tone that made Lisa's heart race before he even spoke the words that would change everything. "We need you to come." "Down to Riverside Marsh," he said, and Lisa's grip tightened on the phone. Riverside Marsh was 15 miles outside Maplewood, a place of dense wetlands and twisted trees that locals avoided. Cleanup crews have been working the flood zones after last week's heavy rains. They found something. The pause that followed felt like an eternity. Lisa's mind raced through every possible scenario, her heart caught between desperate hope and paralyzing fear. 3 years of waiting had taught her that. Phone calls from Detective Williams rarely brought good news, but there was something in his voice, a gravity that suggested this wasn't just another routine update. "We found remains. Small remains," he continued, his professional composure barely containing what sounded like genuine emotion. "I'd rather not discuss details over the phone, but we need you to come identify some items that might be connected to Rebecca's case." The world tilted on its axis. Lisa's legs gave out, and she sank onto the kitchen stool, her free hand gripping the counter's edge as if it were the only thing anchoring her to reality. The implications hit her in waves. Remains meant her daughter was gone. Really gone. Not missing, but dead. But it also meant answers. Closure. The end of the torturous uncertainty that had consumed 3 years of her life. What Detective Williams told her next would reveal the true horror of what those cleanup crews had discovered in the flooded marsh, hidden beneath years of accumulated mud and debris. They had found something that defied explanation. A vintage oven, sealed shut with industrial adhesive, containing evidence that would forever change how Lisa understood her daughter's disappearance. The journey to that marsh would force Lisa to confront a hidden truth so devastating that it would challenge everything she thought she knew about trust, love, and the people closest to us. Sometimes the most shocking revelations come not from strangers, but from those we never imagined capable of such darkness. The journey to face your worst nightmare often begins with the simplest actions. And for Lisa, it started with her trembling hands reaching for that worn manila folder she kept in the kitchen drawer. Rebecca's case file had become a sacred artifact over the past 3 years, filled with police reports, photographs, newspaper clippings, and hope that refused to die. Every document represented another sleepless night. Another lead followed. Another prayer whispered into the darkness. As Lisa clutched that folder against her chest, she couldn't have imagined how this drive would mark the beginning of a complete transformation in her understanding of everything she thought she knew about her daughter's disappearance. The familiar streets of Maplewood gave way to rural highways, and with each mile, the landscape seemed to mirror her emotional journey from the known into something darker and more mysterious. The dense coastal forest pressed in, on both sides of the road, creating a tunnel of towering Douglas firs that blocked out most of the morning light. This wasn't just a physical journey to Riverside Marsh, it was a passage between 2 versions of reality. The Lisa who had woken up that morning was still clinging to 3 years of questions and possibilities. The Lisa who would return from this marsh would carry answers that would forever change her mindset about trust, family, and the hidden truths that can exist behind the most ordinary facades. When the marsh finally came into view, the scene that greeted Lisa felt like stepping into a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Police vehicles lined the muddy access road, their red and blue lights creating an eerie strobe effect in the morning mist that clung to the tree line. The impact of seeing so much official activity was overwhelming. Crime scene tape cordoned off a large area near the water's edge, and people in protective gear moved with purposeful urgency around what appeared to be a central point of focus. This wasn't just another false lead or routine investigation. The sheer scale of the response told Lisa that whatever those cleanup crews had found in the flood-damaged marsh was significant enough to mobilize multiple departments and specialists. As she parked behind a forensics van and sat for a moment gathering courage, she could see Detective Williams' familiar figure coordinating with other officials. The decisions made in the next few minutes would strip away 3 years of uncertainty, but they would also reveal revelations so shocking that they would challenge everything Lisa believed about the people closest to her. Sometimes the most profound transformations happen not through gradual change, but through single moments that split our lives into before and after. Sometimes the most devastating revelations come wrapped in the most ordinary objects, and what Detective Williams was about to show Lisa would forever transform her understanding of evil's ability to hide in plain sight. As he guided her toward the taped perimeter, his hand gentle but firm on her elbow, Lisa could feel her entire world shifting beneath her feet with each step they took toward the truth. What sat on that blue tarp defied comprehension. a grotesque appliance that seemed monstrously out of place in the natural setting of the marsh. It was a vintage oven from the 1960s, its bright red enamel still visible beneath layers of rust and mud that spoke of years hidden beneath the water's surface. But it wasn't just the oven's presence that made Lisa's stomach clench with dread. It was the way the door had been sealed shut with multiple layers of industrial adhesive, crudely applied as if someone had been desperate to ensure nothing could escape. The mindset required to use such an object for unspeakable purposes was something Lisa's maternal heart couldn't initially process. This wasn't just evidence of a crime, it was a monument to calculated cruelty that challenged everything she believed about human nature and the capacity for evil that can exist behind the most mundane facades. Detective Williams gestured toward an evidence table where clear bags lay in neat rows, and Lisa stepped closer with trembling legs. Inside the sealed oven, forensics teams had made discoveries that would haunt investigators for years to come. Small bones had been carefully laid out in anatomical order, but it was the fabric fragments that delivered the killing blow to Lisa's already shattered heart. Pieces of burgundy velvet fused to metal, scorched but still recognizable, with delicate white lace trim that survived despite the damage. The impact of recognition hit Lisa like a physical blow. This was exactly the fabric from Rebecca's favorite princess dress, the one she'd insisted on wearing constantly, calling it her most precious possession. The same dress Rebecca had worn to her 7th birthday party just months before she vanished. The dress that represented all her daughter's joy and innocence. The journey from hope to devastating certainty happened in that single moment of recognition. 3 years of wondering, searching, and praying collapsed into the undeniable truth that her beautiful little girl was gone, and someone had deliberately chosen to end her life in the most horrific way imaginable. The human mind has a breaking point, and Lisa reached hers in that moment when reality crashed down with the force of an avalanche. Her knees buckled and she hit the muddy ground hard, her hands clawing at the earth as if she could somehow dig her way back to a world where this nightmare wasn't real. The transformation from a mother clinging to hope into a woman facing the most devastating truth imaginable happened in an instant, and the impact was so profound that her body simply couldn't remain upright. This wasn't just grief. It was the complete shattering of 3 years' worth of carefully constructed possibilities. Every scenario she'd imagined, every prayer she'd whispered, every sleepless night spent wondering if Rebecca was somewhere out there waiting to come home, all of it collapsed into the undeniable reality of that burgundy velvet fabric. The princess dress that had represented Rebecca's joy and innocence was now evidence in her murder case, and the mindset shift required to accept this truth was almost more than any parent could bear. The forensics team had stopped working, giving Lisa this moment of raw grief, understanding that some discoveries require time to process. Around them, the marsh was silent except for Lisa's broken sobs and the distant call of mourning birds, indifferent to human tragedy. But just as Lisa felt completely alone in her anguish, a familiar voice cut through the crime scene's controlled chaos. Lisa. Oh God. Lisa. She looked up through tear-blurred eyes to see David Thompson pushing past the outer perimeter tape, her ex-husband's face, displaying what appeared to be genuine shock and grief. He was still wearing his hardware store uniform, the red vest with Thompson's hardware embroidered on the chest, and his usually composed features were crumbling as he took in the horrific scene before him. The journey from their contentious divorce to this shared moment of tragedy seemed to dissolve in an instant. Despite all their differences, despite the bitter arguments and custody battles, David was still Rebecca's father, and he was experiencing the same devastating transformation that Lisa had just endured. Without hesitation, he dropped to his knees beside her in the mud, wrapping his arms around her shoulders and pulling her against him with the same protective instinct that had once made them a family. "We'll get through this together," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Just like we always promised we would for Rebecca." The familiar scent of sawdust and coffee that clung to his shirt transported Lisa back to better times, when this man had been her partner in building a life and raising their daughter. In moments of profound tragedy, our minds often seek comfort in the familiar, and for Lisa, David's embrace represented a bridge back to a time when their biggest worry was Rebecca's homework or what story to read at bedtime. The transformation that grief creates can temporarily dissolve years of resentment and disappointment, allowing two people who had grown apart to rediscover their shared love for the child who had brought them together in the first place. 3 years of divorce proceedings, custody arguments, and bitter exchanges seemed insignificant compared to the magnitude of what they were facing together. David's work obsession that had destroyed their marriage now felt like such a small problem when measured against the devastating reality of losing Rebecca forever. The mindset shift was immediate and profound. They were no longer ex-spouses fighting over visitation schedules, but two parents united in the most heartbreaking circumstance imaginable. Detective Williams crouched near them, his weathered face showing the strain of delivering news that no parent should ever have to hear. His voice was professionally gentle as he explained the next steps in a process that would either confirm their worst fears or provide one last thread of hope to cling to. The DNA tests would take 72 hours to provide definitive identification, though he cautioned that given the size of the remains and the unmistakable dress fragments, the likelihood was extremely high that this was Rebecca. The impact of those words, 72 hours, created a strange suspension between hope and despair. For 3 days, Lisa and David would exist in a liminal space where their daughter was both found and lost, both confirmed dead and possibly still missing. The full forensic examination would take much longer, Detective Williams explained, but the initial tests would provide the answers. They needed to begin the painful journey toward closure. This waiting period would become its own form of torture, a forced meditation on the difference between knowing and not knowing, between the agony of uncertainty and the finality of confirmed loss. But what Lisa and David didn't yet understand was that the DNA confirmation would be just the beginning of a much deeper investigation that would reveal hidden truths about the person responsible for Rebecca's death. The decisions made during those 72 hours of waiting would set in motion a chain of events that would expose a web of deception so close to home that it would challenge everything they thought they knew about trust, family, and the people we allow into our most intimate spaces. The human instinct to take action in the face of overwhelming grief often manifests in the need to do something, anything, that might bring meaning to senseless tragedy. David's suggestion that they review Rebecca's case files together represented more than just a practical decision. It was a way for two devastated parents to channel their anguish into purposeful activity, to feel like they were still fighting for their daughter even though the battle had fundamentally changed. Lisa found herself agreeing to meet at her house, where she'd maintained Rebecca's case documentation with the meticulous care of someone whose entire world had narrowed down to finding answers. The transformation from the crime scene back to familiar territory felt surreal, like stepping between two different dimensions of the same nightmare. David followed her in his pickup truck, and the convoy of two vehicles driving through Maplewood's suburban streets carried the weight of shared purpose and devastating new knowledge. Returning to the 1970s ranch-style home where Rebecca had vanished was like walking into a shrine of suspended time. Every corner held memories that had been preserved with painful precision. Rebecca's artwork still, magneted to the refrigerator exactly where she'd placed it 3 years ago, her height marks penciled on the kitchen door frame showing her growth from toddler to 8-year-old. Her favorite cereal still occupying the same spot in the pantry because Lisa couldn't bear the finality of throwing it away. The mindset required to live surrounded by these artifacts of interrupted childhood was something only another parent could truly understand. David moved through the space with the careful reverence of someone revisiting a sacred place, his familiarity with the house evident despite their years of separation. He still knew where everything was kept, still moved toward the kitchen with the practiced ease of someone who had once called this place home. The impact of being in this environment while processing the morning's revelations created an almost overwhelming emotional pressure. This was the house where Rebecca had taken her first steps, where she'd blown out birthday candles, where she'd fallen asleep reading in Lisa's bed during thunderstorms. It was also the house she'd left for the last time, walking out the back gate into the hands of someone who had been watching, waiting, planning her abduction with calculated precision. The journey toward uncovering the truth behind Rebecca's disappearance was about to take an unexpected turn, because what Lisa was going to discover, hidden in plain sight, would challenge everything she thought she knew about the people closest to her family. The dining table where Rebecca had once eaten her breakfast and demanded butterfly pancakes now became a makeshift command center for two parents desperate to find new meaning in 3 years of documented heartbreak. Lisa mechanically retrieved the case file from the kitchen drawer and spread its contents across the familiar wooden surface. Police reports, witness statements, photographs, and maps, marked with search grids that represented thousands of hours of desperate searching. The transformation from family dining space to investigation headquarters felt both natural and surreal. David returned with 2 mugs of coffee, moving through Lisa's kitchen with the muscle memory of someone who had once shared this daily ritual. Despite their divorce, despite the bitter arguments about his work schedule and emotional absence, grief had temporarily restored their ability to function as a team united by their love for Rebecca. As they reviewed the timeline that had been seared into both their memories, the familiar details took on new weight in light of the morning's discovery. August 12, 2000. Rebecca had been playing in the backyard while Lisa tackled the weekly laundry routine. The methodical checking every 10 to 15 minutes, the precision of that final check at 3:30 when Lisa found only silence and an open gate that she was absolutely certain she had latched. The mindset shift from reviewing these facts as part of an active search to examining them as the prelude to confirmed murder was devastating. Every detail now carried the weight of finality. These weren't clues that might lead to finding Rebecca alive, but evidence that documented the last normal moments of a little girl's life before someone with calculated intentions changed everything forever. David's alibi had always been ironclad, a fact that had provided both comfort and frustration during the initial investigation. He'd been at Thompson's Hardware, with 3 employees who could verify his presence, plus security cameras that showed him at the register until 5:45 that evening. The documentation was thorough and had never been questioned by investigators, yet something about reviewing it now, in this new context, created a subtle unease that Lisa couldn't quite identify. The journey through these familiar facts was revealing patterns that hadn't been visible before, connections that only became apparent when viewed through the lens of what they now knew about Rebecca's fate. The decisions someone had made on that August afternoon weren't random or opportunistic. They demonstrated a level of planning and knowledge about the Thompson family's routines that suggested something much more sinister than a crime of chance. The power of memory to both comfort and torture became evident as Lisa and David found themselves staring at photographs of Rebecca in her burgundy velvet dress at her 7th birthday party. In the image, chocolate cake smeared Rebecca's cheek as she beamed with pure joy, completely unaware that this precious dress would one day become evidence in her own murder case. The transformation from a symbol of childhood happiness to something so sinister felt like another layer of violation. David picked up the photograph, his finger tracing Rebecca's outline with what appeared to be genuine tenderness. "That dress," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of bittersweet memories. "She wanted to wear it everywhere, remember? We had to hide it sometimes, just to wash it." The intimate knowledge he displayed about Rebecca's attachment to the dress was both touching and somehow unsettling, though Lisa couldn't quite identify why his words created such an odd sensation in her chest. The mindset required to live with the knowledge that someone had been studying their family's most private moments was something that had haunted Lisa for 3 years. David's observation that the kidnapper must have been watching them, learning their routines, knowing exactly when the neighborhood would be quiet, gave voice to the paranoia that had consumed her thoughts since that terrible August afternoon. This wasn't a random crime of opportunity. It was the result of calculated surveillance and planning. Someone had made deliberate decisions about when to strike, had studied Lisa's laundry schedule, had known that she would be inside for at least 30 minutes during the wash cycle. The impact of realizing that their normal family life had been observed and analyzed by someone with such evil intentions felt like another violation layered on top of their grief. The journey toward understanding how thoroughly their privacy had been invaded was just beginning. David's insights about the level of planning involved seemed to come from a place of genuine concern, yet there was something in his manner that Lisa found increasingly difficult to reconcile with the husband she remembered. His knowledge seemed almost too detailed, his observations about the kidnapper's methods surprisingly sophisticated for someone who worked in hardware retail. The hidden truth that would soon emerge would challenge everything Lisa thought she knew about trust, about the people we allow closest to our families, and about how evil can operate from within the very relationships we consider safest. Sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who already have access to our most vulnerable moments. Sometimes our subconscious mind recognizes patterns long before our conscious thoughts can process them, and after David left to give her space, Lisa found herself unable to shake the image of that red oven from her thoughts. The transformation from active grief to obsessive focus happened gradually, but the nagging sensation that something about the appliance was familiar beyond its horrific contents refused to leave her alone. This wasn't just trauma-induced fixation. There was something specific about the oven's color and style that triggered a memory she couldn't quite access. The mindset shift from processing the emotional impact of the discovery to analyzing its physical details represented Lisa's natural investigative instincts kicking in, even in her devastated state. She picked up her phone and dialed Detective Williams' direct line, her voice surprisingly steady as she explained her request for close-up photographs. The impact of studying those emailed images was immediate and unsettling. The forensics photos revealed a distinctive cherry-red Westinghouse oven with Art Deco-style chrome handles that marked it as a premium model from the 1960s. Despite the mud and rust that obscured some details, the elegant curves of the hardware and the specific shade of red enamel were clearly visible, creating an almost artistic quality that seemed grotesquely inappropriate given the oven's horrible purpose. Lisa printed the photographs on her inkjet printer, the colors coming out slightly off but clear enough for detailed examination. As she spread them across her dining table where Rebecca's case files still lay scattered, that sense of familiarity grew stronger with each passing minute. The journey from vague recognition to concrete memory was like trying to recall a dream. The harder she focused, the more elusive the connection became. There was something about that particular shade of red, not fire engine or burgundy, but something more specific, almost candy apple in tone. The chrome details weren't just functional, they were decorative, speaking to an era when appliances were designed to be conversation pieces rather than mere utility items. These weren't random observations born from grief-induced obsession. They were the products of a mind that had seen this exact combination of features before, somewhere in her past. The decisions Lisa made in the next few hours would lead her down a path of discovery that would challenge everything she thought she knew about the people in her life. What seemed like innocent curiosity about a piece of evidence would soon reveal connections that went far deeper than coincidence. The transformation from grieving mother to determined investigator happened gradually, as Lisa made the decision to actively pursue the nagging familiarity that refused to leave her thoughts. Armed with the printed photographs, she began a systematic journey through Maplewood's appliance stores, driven by an instinct she couldn't fully explain but felt compelled to follow. This wasn't just random searching, it was the methodical approach of someone whose mindset had shifted from passive grief to active investigation. Modern Appliance on Main Street proved unhelpful, the young salesman looking at the photos with polite interest but shaking his head apologetically. Retro Kitchen's owner recognized the general style but dealt mostly in 1950s pieces, directing Lisa toward what she called the real expert in vintage appliances. These encounters, while unsuccessful, were building Lisa's knowledge and confidence, each conversation adding layers to her understanding of what made this particular oven special. Harold Hansen's Appliance Repair occupied a narrow storefront that had clearly been serving the community for decades. The bell above the door chimed as Lisa entered, and the scent of motor oil and old metal filled her nostrils, creating an atmosphere that spoke of craftsmanship and expertise accumulated over years of dedicated work. Harold looked up from a disassembled mixer on his workbench, his thick glasses and hands that showed a lifetime of repair work immediately inspiring confidence. The impact of his reaction to the photographs was immediate and startling. Harold's eyebrows rose with unmistakable recognition as he held the pictures under his bench light, his expression transforming from casual interest to focused expertise. "Well, I'll be," he said, with the satisfaction of someone whose knowledge had just proven valuable. "That's a 1966 Westinghouse Gourmet series. See those handles? Dead giveaway." But it was his next revelation that made Lisa's heart begin racing with new possibilities. The cherry apple deluxe color was only manufactured from 1965 to 1968, making it quite rare in the vintage appliance market. This wasn't just any old oven. It was a distinctive, limited production model that would be memorable to anyone who had encountered it. The journey from random evidence to specific, traceable artifact was happening before Lisa's eyes. The hidden truth that was about to emerge would prove that sometimes the most significant revelations come not from dramatic discoveries, but from the patient accumulation of technical details that create an undeniable pattern. Harold's expertise was about to unlock connections that would challenge everything Lisa thought she knew about coincidence and proximity. The power of meticulous record-keeping became evident as Harold moved to a shelf lined with old ledgers, running his weathered finger along the spines until he found the volume marked 1999. The transformation from casual conversation to focused investigation happened instantly as he flipped through pages covered in his careful handwriting, each entry representing years of dedicated service to his community's appliance needs. "Here we go," Harold said, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone whose organizational habits had just proven invaluable. March 20th, 1999, Westinghouse Gourmet Series Cherry Apple Deluxe, cash sale, $475. The impact of those dates hit Lisa like a physical blow. Just 5 months before Rebecca's disappearance, someone had purchased the exact same model of oven that would later become her daughter's tomb. But it was Harold's next revelation that truly shifted Lisa's mindset from coincidence to something far more sinister. The sale had stuck in his memory not just because vintage ovens were uncommon purchases, but because of the buyer's unusually specific technical questions. This wasn't someone interested in the oven's aesthetic appeal or general cooking capabilities. This was someone conducting what felt almost like a technical interview. The journey through Harold's memories revealed a pattern of inquiries that chilled Lisa to the bone. The buyer had been particularly interested in the oven's maximum temperature, capabilities, its heat retention properties, and the precise interior dimensions. But it was the final question that revealed the true horror of the purchaser's intentions. They had specifically asked about how well the door sealed, whether it created an airtight environment when closed. These weren't the questions of someone planning to bake casseroles or roast holiday turkeys. The hidden truth behind such technical specificity suggested a mindset focused on containment, on creating an enclosed space that could serve purposes far removed from normal cooking. The impact of understanding what these questions really meant transformed Harold's innocent business transaction into evidence of premeditated evil. The decisions made during that March transaction weren't random. They represented careful planning by someone who knew exactly what they intended to do with their purchase. The buyer's interest in heat retention and sealing capabilities revealed a level of calculation that suggested they had been planning Rebecca's murder for months before they ever approached Lisa's backyard. The transformation from breakthrough moment to bureaucratic reality hit Lisa hard when she called Detective Williams with Harold's information. His response was professionally measured but deeply frustrating. While he acknowledged the suspicious timing of the oven purchase, he explained that thousands of people owned vintage appliances. Without a name or better description of the buyer, the information wasn't enough evidence to pursue immediately. The mindset shift from feeling like she'd cracked the case to understanding the limitations of circumstantial evidence was deflating. But Lisa's investigative instincts told her this wasn't just coincidence. Someone had purchased that exact model of oven 5 months before Rebecca disappeared. Someone who had asked disturbingly specific questions about containment and heat retention. The impact of this timing felt too significant to dismiss, even if the legal system required more concrete connections to move forward with an investigation. Despite their complicated relationship, Lisa felt David deserved to know about this development. As Rebecca's father, he had a right to understand every piece of evidence that emerged, no matter how circumstantial it might seem to the authorities. The journey from discovering the information to deciding to share it represented Lisa's continued commitment to transparency, even in the face of their personal differences. When she dialed David's cell phone, it rang 3 times before he answered, his voice slightly out of breath as if he'd been running or moving something heavy. "Hello," he said, and there was something in his tone that seemed different from their earlier conversation at the crime scene. Lisa explained Harold's discovery about the oven purchase, but David's response felt oddly distant, almost distracted. What caught Lisa's attention most was his casual mention of being at the cabin, their old family retreat at Silver Lake that she distinctly remembered him promising to sell during their divorce proceedings. The hidden truth about this property would soon become crucial to understanding the full scope of what had happened to Rebecca, but for now, it simply represented another broken promise in their relationship. The decisions David had made about keeping the cabin secret revealed a pattern of deception that went far deeper than Lisa could have imagined. His voice carried an echo quality that suggested he was in a large, empty space, and something about the combination of his location and his evasive responses triggered an unease that Lisa couldn't quite identify. The transformation from shared grief to growing suspicion began with David's casual revelation that he'd never actually sold the Silver Lake cabin, despite explicitly promising to do so during their divorce proceedings. Lisa's hand tightened on the phone as she processed this information, her mind immediately questioning what other promises might have been broken without her knowledge. The mindset shift from trusting his word to wondering about his honesty felt like another layer of betrayal added to an already devastating day. David's explanation sounded reasonable on the surface. He claimed he couldn't bring himself to sign the papers when it came time to finalize the sale, citing too many family memories with Rebecca at the property. His voice carried what seemed like genuine emotion as he described his attachment to the place where they'd taught Rebecca to swim off the dock and roasted marshmallows by the outdoor fire pit. But something about his timing felt calculated, as if he'd prepared this explanation in advance. The journey from accepting his words at face value to questioning his motives was subtle but significant. Lisa distinctly remembered her relief during the divorce when he'd agreed to sell the cabin, knowing that the property held too many painful memories for her to deal with. The impact of discovering he'd kept it secret for 3 years created a new kind of hurt, not just the grief of loss, but the sting of deliberate deception. What happened next would reveal the true extent of David's manipulation. His invitation for Lisa to join him at the cabin came with an urgency that seemed disproportionate to his stated reasoning. "Why don't you come up?" he suggested, his voice taking on an almost eager quality that contrasted sharply with the gravity of their morning's discovery. "I know today's been hell, and if you need to talk more about these findings, about Emma, about anything, I'm here." The hidden truth behind his insistence became clearer as he continued building his case for why she shouldn't be alone. He mentioned having steaks defrosting, emphasizing his hatred of eating alone, especially after such a devastating day of revelations about their daughter. The decisions he was making in real time to persuade her felt increasingly manipulative, though Lisa couldn't yet understand why her presence at the cabin seemed so important to him. Behind the scenes of what appeared to be a grieving father's genuine concern lay something much darker and more calculated. The transformation from innocent invitation to something that felt almost like pressure was subtle but unmistakable, and Lisa found herself caught between her natural desire for comfort and a growing instinct that something wasn't right about David's behavior. The journey toward making life-altering decisions often begins in the spaces that hold our deepest emotions, and for Lisa, that sacred space was Rebecca's bedroom. Before leaving to meet David at the cabin, she found herself drawn to this preserved shrine of interrupted childhood, where every object remained exactly as it had been the day Rebecca disappeared. The transformation from active investigation back to intimate grief happened naturally as she settled on the edge of the twin, Bed, surrounded by unicorn comforters, stuffed animals, and crayon drawings taped to pink walls. Holding Rebecca's favorite teddy bear against her chest, Lisa breathed in the faint scent that still clung to the worn fur, a mixture of baby shampoo and that indefinable sweetness that belongs only to children. The mindset shift from focusing on evidence and timelines to simply missing her daughter created a raw vulnerability that made David's invitation seem less suspicious and more like a lifeline. In moments of profound grief, even questionable comfort can feel better than facing the darkness alone. But as Lisa sat surrounded by Rebecca's belongings, memories began surfacing that cast David's current behavior in a different light. The impact of remembering his pattern of broken promises hit her with unexpected force. How many times had he disappointed Rebecca with last-minute cancellations of promised cabin trips? She could picture her daughter's small suitcase packed and waiting by the door, Rebecca's excited face falling as David called to explain that work demands meant they'd have to postpone their adventure until next weekend. Those next weekends had rarely materialized. David's work schedule had always taken precedence over family time, a pattern that had ultimately contributed to the dissolution of their marriage. The hidden truth behind his current insistence on spending time at the cabin felt oddly inconsistent with the man who had once found every excuse to avoid going there with his wife and daughter. The decisions Rebecca had made during those disappointments, the way she'd quietly unpack her little suitcase and put away her excitement, now seemed heartbreakingly prophetic. Behind the scenes of what had appeared to be a father too busy to prioritize family time, Lisa was beginning to recognize a different pattern entirely. The transformation in her understanding was subtle but significant. David's relationship with the cabin wasn't about cherishing family memories. It was about something else entirely. The journey toward accepting his invitation was becoming less about seeking comfort and more about following an instinct she couldn't quite name. Something about his eagerness to have her at the cabin, combined with his secret ownership of the property, created a combination that her subconscious mind was beginning to recognize as dangerous. The transformation in David's demeanor during the 40-minute drive through dense Washington wilderness was striking and somehow unsettling. As they wound through towering Douglas firs and crossed wooden bridges over mountain streams, he seemed to shed the grief-stricken facade he'd worn at the crime scene, becoming almost animated as he shared memories of Rebecca's adventures at the lake. His voice took on a warmth that Lisa hadn't heard in years as he recalled her first sunfish catch and her insistence on naming it Princess Bubbles III. The mindset shift from the devastated father she'd comforted in the mud to this almost nostalgic storyteller felt jarring, though Lisa attributed it to the familiar comfort of returning to a place filled with happier memories. David's hands relaxed on the steering wheel as he navigated the winding forest roads with practiced ease, clearly having made this journey many times during the 3 years Lisa thought the property had been sold. When Silver Lake finally came into view, the impact of seeing the cabin was immediate and surprising. Far from the neglected weekend retreat she'd expected, the property looked remarkably well-maintained and even improved from her memories. David had restained the deck to a rich honey color, replaced the old windows with modern energy-efficient models, and added flower boxes along the railings that spoke of regular care and attention. "You've really kept it up," Lisa observed as they parked beside the cabin, genuinely impressed despite her growing unease about his deception. Regarding the property's ownership, David's explanation came quickly, perhaps too quickly, as he described spending most weekends at the cabin working on renovations as a way to cope with Rebecca's disappearance and process his thoughts. The journey from grief-driven maintenance to what appeared to be genuine home improvement suggested a level of attachment to this place that went beyond simple sentiment. Behind the scenes of his weekend renovation projects lay decisions that spoke to long-term planning rather than temporary coping mechanisms. The hidden truth about why David had invested so much time and energy into a property he'd promised to sell was becoming increasingly difficult to reconcile with his stated motivations. The transformation of the cabin from family retreat to David's private sanctuary represented more than just home improvement. It suggested a completely different relationship with this isolated location than Lisa had ever imagined. the impact of understanding. That he'd been secretly living a parallel life at this remote property created new questions about what else he might have been hiding during their years of separation. The transformation from suspicion back to genuine emotion happened the moment Lisa stepped inside the renovated cabin and discovered that David had preserved Rebecca's presence throughout the space. Her picture books were still lined up on the bottom shelf of the bookcase in perfect order. Goodnight Moon, Where the Wild, Things Are, and The Velveteen Rabbit, exactly as Rebecca had arranged them during their last family visit. The impact of seeing these artifacts of interrupted childhood was overwhelming, temporarily washing away Lisa's growing doubts about David's motivations. Rebecca's tiny fishing rod hung on the same wooden pegs where they'd always kept it, alongside her child-sized life jacket that still bore the faint scent of lake water and sunscreen. The living room walls displayed family photos from happier times, their trip to the lake when Rebecca was 5, her first camping adventure, the 3 of them on the deck during a spectacular sunset. But there were also newer additions that David must have copied and framed after their divorce, images from Rebecca's life that he'd clearly treasured enough to display in his secret sanctuary. The mindset shift from viewing this as deception to understanding it as a father's way of keeping his daughter's memory alive felt natural and touching. Maybe David's attachment to this place was exactly what it appeared to be, a grieving parent's attempt to maintain connection with his lost child. The journey through these preserved memories was healing Lisa's suspicions, making David's behavior seem less manipulative and more heartbreakingly human. But the hidden truth about David's real relationship with this cabin was about to reveal itself in the most shocking way possible. While exploring the updated bathroom that David had mentioned, Lisa noticed a door she didn't remember from their family visits. Thinking it might lead to additional renovations he'd completed, she pushed it open and stepped into what appeared to be a garage workspace. The transformation from touching sentiment to paralyzing terror happened in an instant. There, sitting in the corner like a monument to calculated evil, was a large cardboard box labeled Westinghouse with the model number GS1966 clearly visible on the side. This was the exact same model. From Harold's ledger, the same type of oven that had become Rebecca's tomb, but this box looked brand new with crisp edges and unfaded printing that spoke of recent purchase rather than vintage acquisition. The impact of recognition hit Lisa like a physical blow, her legs turning to jelly as the implications crashed over her in devastating waves. Behind the scenes of David's weekend renovation projects lay evidence of preparation for something unspeakable, decisions made with calculated precision that challenged everything she thought she knew about her ex-husband. The transformation from terror to confusion happened when David appeared in the garage doorway, immediately rushing to Lisa's side as she gasped for air and struggled to steady herself against his workbench. His face showed what appeared to be genuine concern and distress as he guided her to sit on a plastic crate, taking her hands in his and coaching her through breathing exercises with the patience of someone who truly cared about her well-being. "Oh, Jesus, I'm so sorry," David said, his voice carrying what seemed like authentic regret as he followed her gaze to the Westinghouse box. "After this morning, seeing any oven must be—" He trailed off, his own eyes filling with tears that appeared completely genuine. The mindset shift from suspicion back to sympathy happened almost involuntarily as Lisa watched this man who had once been her husband struggle with his own emotions while trying to comfort her. His explanation came quickly but sounded reasonable. His kitchen oven had broken the previous month, and this particular model was the only one that would fit the old space in his cabin's vintage kitchen design. The impact of his obvious distress at her reaction, combined with the logical nature of his story, began to calm Lisa's racing heart. Behind the scenes of her panic, her rational mind was reassuring her that lots of people owned Westinghouse ovens, that coincidences did happen, that grief was making her see connections where none existed. The journey from the garage back into the cabin felt like emerging from a nightmare into something approaching normalcy. David fussed over her with the tenderness she remembered from their early marriage, bringing her water and a blanket while apologizing repeatedly for not thinking about how seeing any oven would affect her after the morning's discovery. His care seemed genuine, his explanations plausible, his grief authentic. But the transformation in atmosphere during dinner revealed a different David entirely. As they sat at the rustic dining table that had once been the site of countless family meals, Lisa found herself picking at her perfectly grilled steak, while David worked his way through multiple beers with concerning efficiency. The familiar space now felt like a barrier between them, rather than the gathering place it had been during their marriage, and his drinking was accelerating at a pace that triggered memories of their worst times together. The decisions David was making in real time, reaching for beer after beer, his increasingly loose movements, the way his eyes were taking on that glassy quality she remembered from their darkest days, began to shift Lisa's mindset from grateful to uncomfortable. The hidden truth about why he'd really brought her to this isolated location was beginning to reveal itself through his behavior, and the impact of understanding that she was alone with an increasingly intoxicated man was starting to outweigh any comfort his explanations had provided. The transformation from grieving ex-husband to something much darker began gradually as David's alcohol consumption loosened his tongue and stripped away the careful facade he'd maintained throughout the day. What started as casual conversation about their shared grief evolved into bitter accusations about their failed marriage, his voice taking on an edge that Lisa recognized from their worst arguments during the divorce proceedings. "You know what I can't stop thinking about," David interrupted her mid-sentence, draining his fourth beer and immediately reaching for another from the six-pack he'd placed on the table. "How hard I worked for this family. 60, 70 hours a week sometimes, building that business from nothing." His words were beginning to slur slightly, and the mindset shift from supportive ex-husband to resentful victim was becoming increasingly uncomfortable to witness. The impact of his escalating accusations hit Lisa like a series of small blows. According to David's alcohol-fueled narrative, she had divorced him the minute things got tough, despite his sacrifices and dedication to providing for their family. But it was when his resentment turned to her post-divorce dating that his behavior became truly inappropriate and aggressive, his voice rising as he described seeing her at Romano's restaurant with another man, calling it a betrayal of their family's memory. The journey from uncomfortable to genuinely frightened happened when Lisa realized the level of surveillance he'd been conducting. His knowledge of her activities was too detailed, too specific for casual observation. Behind the scenes of what she'd thought was a clean break from their marriage, David had been watching, documenting and nursing a resentment that had clearly grown more toxic with each passing month. When Lisa tried to call Detective Williams for updates, hoping to create some connection to the outside world and diffuse the tension, she discovered her phone showed no signal bars. The isolation she'd initially welcomed as peaceful now felt ominous and deliberate. Her request to use the landline revealed another calculated decision on David's part. He'd disconnected it months ago, claiming it was too expensive for a weekend property. The hidden truth about why David had been so insistent on bringing her to this remote location was becoming crystal clear. They were 40 minutes from town, completely cut off from communication, and David was drinking heavily while displaying increasingly erratic and aggressive behavior. The transformation from seeking comfort in shared grief to being trapped with someone whose mental state was deteriorating rapidly created a fear that Lisa was only beginning to process. The decisions David had made to isolate them weren't accidental. They were the calculated moves of someone whose true intentions went far beyond providing mutual comfort during a difficult time. The transformation from uncomfortable dinner companion to mortal danger happened in an instant when Lisa stood up and announced her intention to leave. David's response was immediate and terrifying. He moved faster than his intoxication should have allowed, positioning himself between Lisa and the door with a calculated precision that revealed the evening's true purpose. The mindset shift from thinking she was dealing with a grieving, drunk ex-husband to understanding she was trapped with something much more dangerous happened in the space of a heartbeat. Going somewhere. David's voice had dropped to something cold and menacing that Lisa had never heard before, even during their worst arguments. The mask he'd worn throughout their marriage, throughout their divorce, throughout the entire day of shared grief, finally slipped away completely. What emerged was someone Lisa didn't recognize. someone whose eyes held a darkness that made her stomach drop with primal fear. The journey from suspicion to horrifying certainty began with David's next words. "You want to know about coincidences, Lisa?" His laugh was hollow and cruel as he swayed slightly, alcohol making him reckless with secrets he'd kept for 3 years. "That oven in my garage. I bought it last month to replace the one I put Rebecca in." The impact of those words didn't register immediately because the human mind simply isn't designed to process such evil from someone we once trusted completely. But as David continued his confession, the hidden truth about Rebecca's disappearance unfolded like a nightmare beyond Lisa's worst imaginings. Behind the scenes of their marriage's dissolution, their custody arrangements, and Rebecca's tragic disappearance, David had been orchestrating something unspeakable. He revealed how he'd kept their daughter imprisoned in the cabin's basement for 3 entire years while Lisa searched desperately, how he'd finally killed her when she refused to stop asking for her mother. The transformation in David was complete now, from the father who had once held Rebecca in the delivery room to the monster who had orchestrated her suffering with methodical precision. The decisions he'd made weren't born from sudden madness but from calculated revenge against Lisa for leaving him, for moving on with her life while he nursed his resentment in isolation. The journey toward survival began when Lisa spotted a hammer on David's workbench. In that moment of pure desperation, driven by 3 years of grief and the devastating knowledge of what he'd done to their innocent daughter, she found strength she didn't know she possessed. The impact of her strike sent David crashing to the floor, finally silencing the voice that had just shattered every remaining piece of her world. Lisa's courage in those final moments didn't just save her own life. It brought justice for Rebecca and closure to a case that had haunted investigators for years. David's full confession to police ensured he would spend the rest of his life behind bars, never again able to harm another family with his calculated evil. Sometimes the most important battles we fight are the ones we never expected to face, and Lisa's story reminds us that strength can emerge from the deepest grief when we need it most. The transformation from victim to survivor, from desperate searching to finding terrible answers, shows us how resilience can manifest in the most impossible circumstances. Behind every headline about missing children are real families facing unimaginable challenges, and understanding these stories helps us recognize the signs that might protect others from similar tragedies. If you've stayed with me through this entire journey, I truly appreciate you being here. Stories like Rebecca's aren't easy to tell or to hear, but they're important because they reveal truths about human nature that we all need to understand. Your willingness to engage with difficult content like this shows you're someone who values learning from real experiences, even when they're painful. If this kind of in-depth storytelling resonates with you, I'd love to have you subscribe to the channel. I put considerable research and care into bringing you these detailed accounts because I believe understanding these cases can make us all more aware and potentially safer. The time you've invested in watching tells me you appreciate thorough investigation over surface-level coverage. Leave me a comment saying, "Justice was served" if you made it all the way to the end. It helps me understand who's really engaging with this content and what stories matter most to you. And if this narrative connected with you in some way, that little like button really does make a difference in helping others discover these important stories. There's a video right here that explores another case where the people closest to a family turned out to be the greatest threat. The patterns we've discussed today appear in ways that might surprise you. Click and continue with me over there, because understanding these connections could be more important than you realize.